Want to get started? Let's get started.
Yeah, let's get started. I think we're good for now.
All right.
Alright,
Welcome everyone. Jag, kick it off.
Alright, guys. Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming, or thanks for watching this recording. This is for the bi-weekly review session number 3, which is loops and repetition, and more specifically, we'll be talking about for and while loops. This is our 3rd session. Next slide. Yeah. So
Little quote of the
going
day.
forward, we're gonna have something called the quote of the day. One of the lead devs will be choosing a quote that they believe would be good for today. So today's quote of the day is "Go for it." Oh, we have someone in chat, by the way.
No,
Oh,
that's
no,
the bot. It's a bot.
So today's quote of the day is "Programming isn't about what you know; it's about what you can figure out." Chris Pine.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a good quote.
It's a great quote. Yeah, before we move on to everything else, we'll just quickly introduce ourselves. So I'm Jagveer. I'm a 3rd-year computer science student here at Laurier.
I'm Robert. I'm also a 3rd-year computer science student here at Laurier, and we're both the dev leads on the LCS team. So yeah, we'll give
Awesome,
you guys we'll give you guys a moment to sign in. You can either scan the code on the screen or type in that link. In fact, Jake, is it possible for you to drop that link in the chat, just so people can just click it?
Yeah, let me try to see if
I
can
can't
do
because I
that
got the
really
presentation
quickly.
open.
Yeah, not logged in. I'll have to log in
But
and
yeah,
do
if
that.
anyone's in chat, say hi.
Yeah. Don't think anyone's in chat.
Well, if there is,
Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Frosty,
Awesome. Thank you. Hello. So we have
hello.
people here. Love
We
to see
do.
it. How was the midterm, Frosty?
Oh, there's Amanda. Hey, Amanda.
By the way, how did everyone's midterm go?
Yeah, well, you
Do you
guys
think
sign
it
in.
was pretty
Don't
easy?
want to
Yeah.
talk about it?
Oh my god.
No. Come on.
What messed you up?
It was pretty okay. Well, it's a little bit. Oh, 122. Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
First, yes, it was good though.
Oh yeah.
How's 104? I mean, yeah, we know 122 is gonna be rough.
Yeah. Yeah. We've experienced it, so
Oh
we know all
yeah.
too well.
Did 122 have one or does 122 have 1 or 2 midterms?
I'm pretty sure it was 1. When we had it, it was 1 midterm, and then the final, unless a new professor came and changed it.
Yeah. I remember failing that midterm. Low key. Got a 40
That
on
was
it.
yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
pulled
man.
through though. Pulled through. The labs are clutch.
Yeah, that's nice.
CP104. The questions were almost the exact same as labs assignments. Yeah. There's not too much they can really change with 104. I find because it's so basic and like foundational like programming that like you can't really like. I guess you can make it like tricky and like use trick questions, but I know like professors don't like to do that. So yeah, it'll probably expect the same for your final too.
Yeah.
To be just like the assignments and labs.
Yeah, it gets more tricky, I'd say,
Yeah.
like after midterm, because now you're getting into more advanced, semi-advanced, let's say, details, like loops, for example, and then later on there'll be like, you'll see we have a roadmap, but there will be like 2D lists, which will be briefly covered.
Yeah.
I believe which will also be on your final, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Also, apologize if Jag's a little bit robot-y, laggy sounding. It's just the internet. Can't really do anything about that.
Wait, is it actually laggy right now?
You're a little bit robot-y, but I don't think there's anything you can do about it. I think it's the connection. It's either mine or yours.
I think it might be mine because I'm like
Yeah,
watching it. There's a little bit input delay, a
yeah.
little bit
It's
lag,
okay.
so
We could still hear you.
that's
All
fine.
right.
You know, I'll be a robot for today. We'll
Yeah,
just move on to the next slide then.
yeah. Who's got a chance? So, I guess I'll
Yeah,
take this one, Jack. It's
you got
fine.
it. Go
Yeah,
for it.
so our current session roadmap, so this is like kind of where we're at as far as um, what session we're at and out of the total that we're going to be doing this term. So currently we're at for and while loops right here, session 3. Just after the midterm, we're in kind of the middle of the sem now, and the next one will be lists and strings, and then files and 2D lists, and then we're gonna have a final exam review session for you guys. So look forward to those sessions coming up. And Jag.
And I just wanted to say for like the list strings, the loops, files, like session 3 and onwards, pretty much like this is foundational. So if you don't understand it, you can feel free to watch the recording because every CP course will have these uh, items as the basic foundation of everything. So yeah, okay.
Alright.
So we'll just move on to the next one, which is like today's agenda. So we'll start off with what are loops, just a quick look at what type of loops and the two main types we'll be talking about today. How do they work? So we have a few diagrams which will help visually explain how they work and how um, it flows. And then we'll be diving deeper into each one with examples for for loops and while loops, as well as clever ways to use loops.
Yeah. I don't.
And then
I don't know why I went
so
backwards.
it's
Okay.
all good. All right, so for this one, it's just useful links and follow along resources that you can use. So we have the math and stats learning support. So they have drop-in sessions and directed homework sessions to give you any extra help in most lower level CS courses. And the links there so you can just take a picture and type it in when you can. And I have to say they're really good. Even if it's not just for CS, there are drop-in, as it says, math, like for 122, 121, any math course, even stats, and the drop-in sessions for homework help are great, as well as like just directed homework sessions where the TA or IA in charge of it will be explaining weekly or uh, weekly lessons, which is amazing because they have such a great insight and understanding of everything that's going on in the course. They can explain it properly. And then there's just a few coding sandboxes. So you can go to Replit or CodePen. Another one which I suggest using is Python Tutor if you like to visualize. Python Tutor, put the code in there, and then you can see step by step what's going on.
Mhm. All right.
Yeah.
So, what are loops? We're gonna start off, kind of just discussing what loops are, and the different types of them. So, what's a loop? A loop is a statement that contains instructions that continually repeat until a certain condition is reached. And there's two types of loops. One is called a for loop, and the other one is called a while loop. And while they'll both have some intersection in their uses, we'll get into, what each one is specifically for. And you could do some interesting things with them, and, you could also do things like nesting loops inside of other loops, which gets a little more complicated. But so,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, so Robert mentioned briefly about what are loops. This is more in-depth explanation. So basically a loop is like a block of code that tells the program to do an operation until a certain condition is satisfied. So the condition can be certain repetition is reached or a process is complete, or as mentioned, a condition is met. So we can be like, hey, like loop through this code 5 times, right? Or loop through this until it's false. And they're in structure, they're similar to if statements. And we'll get more into the types of loops as well as their examples in the upcoming slides.
Yeah. And just to add on, the main use of loops, if you're to think about it in the most like basic sense, using a loop as like a tool, um, if you let's say you want to print something 10 times and you wanted to print the same thing, like you wanted to print hello world 10 times in like the most basic sense, but there's two ways of doing this. You can literally type the print statement 10 times into your code, or you can make yourself a loop. Um, Either one of the loops, I won't get that deep just yet, and you can have it say for like, run this loop 10 times, and what I want to do every time this loop condition is met, print out hello world, and then you can have your conditions so that your loop will run 5, 10 times, how many ever times you want, and then it'll print it out without you having to retype the code over and over and over again. So that's kind of the main use. And so, as I mentioned, the two types of loops, we have the for loops and we have while loops. And to start off with for loops, when you should use it is when you know the number of times you need the loop to run, or know a number of items to run a loop on. So it's very like a for loop is like for I in range if in Python. So for I in range 5 is meaning like if my I is starting at 0 in range 5, I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly in Python it's up to 5. Is that right, Jag? Is it inclusive or exclusive of 5 though?
Yeah, it'll be like yeah, it'll be up to 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know the exact number of times you need it to run. So it's just a matter of just saying I need this to run X amount of times in like the most basic sense of a for loop. It can get more complicated from that, like if you start introducing some like variables and things like that. But in the most basic case, it's I need this to run 5, 10 times or whatnot. So I'm gonna have a variable, I, and then I'm gonna have something, a condition. In Python, it's a little bit different because you can use like the in operator and then the range function to kind of get around that. But it's like I'm gonna start at I equals 0, let's say, and then I want to go up until 5, and my code's gonna run 5 times. I know that because I'm telling it to do that. Where as in a while loop, it's a little bit more, the usefulness comes in with like the conditions that you can do, and it almost works as like an if statement that's repeated over and over again if you want to think about it like that. um you can think of it like you can almost read it, right? Like while this statement, and this statement I mean generally by like, what's next to the while. So if you're looking on screen here, like I is less than 5. So like while I is less than 5, run this code. And then this code, I mean the indented code underneath while in the example. So this is really useful when you don't really know an exact number of times your code needs to run for. Like in the example below, um we know that it's gonna run like 5 times because we're taking the total. And actually, the example is actually an infinite loop because I is I is never iterated. So that's actually a good example. Um, so if you look if you look at the example, we can see that the total 0 and then I 0, and we're running for I is less than 5. So while I is less than 5 is true, total equals total plus I. And the funny thing here is that
We'll
I
we'll
is
we'll
never
get more.
iterated, so
Yeah.
I is never iterated, meaning like it's never added to itself. It's never like the number's never updated, so it's always gonna be 0. So then total is always gonna be 0, and that will just run forever, that loop. So yeah, we'll get into a little bit. That's kind of like one of like the things that you'll run into a lot with loops, are kind of like trying to make them not infinite, especially with while loops.
Yeah. So you have to be careful. We'll talk more about that in the slides to come.
Yeah.
So the next slide is like how do loops work. So for the next two slides, we'll just be talking about how they work. We'll be showing like a loop process diagram for all the visual learners, which is really helpful. So
Mhm.
you just go on that. All right, so this is the diagram for the process diagram for the for loop. So as you mentioned, you start off with the loop, correct? There's the condition. So the for loop, it's like for I in range, whatever. So that's the condition, and then it'll move on to the statements, the statement section. So it'll do whatever code it has to do, whatever's in the chunk of code, and then it'll increment or decrement to the next number or next item. So as you mentioned, it's for I in range 5. I starts at 0, I believe it was in Python or general,
And
and
yeah.
then you use in the block of code, it'll run whatever code's in there, and once it's done running that code, it'll increment to. So we'll go to the next one, 1. All right, da 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 da, and it'll keep going, looping through that over and over again. And once you reach the end of that condition, so you can't go any further because the condition states you can only do it 5 times, it'll end the loop. So does anyone have any questions about that so far, or was it pretty
Yeah.
straightforward?
Any questions in chat? Give it like
Yeah, chill for now.
10 seconds or something. Yeah, you could just throw questions in chat as
Yeah,
we go. We'll answer them.
yeah,
So we're going to B.
yeah. You'll be working a lot with for loops as well as while loops, so you'll get pretty used to how they work pretty quickly, especially in the next 2-3 weeks, as I believe like all your assignments will require some sort of for or while loop. All right, there's no questions. I guess we can move on.
Yeah. Did you cover slide the B?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
If you want to cover it, you can go for it,
Yeah,
or
I'll do B. So
yeah.
B is the while loop process diagram. So it's very similar to the for loop one that Jake just covered. Um, except our condition is a little bit more general and it's, like I was mentioning before, it can be really anything like an if statement, like any sort of like comparison or condition. So you're gonna have it enter the loop, some statement, and then it enters the loop, and then it checks the condition. So this is like when if you visualize like the while line, so you have like while and then another like the rest of the line next to the while, which is your condition. It's gonna enter the loop and then it's gonna check if that's true. Because if it's true, right, we're gonna follow this line here downwards and it's going to say if it's true run the statements, and what the statements are the indented part, a part of the while loop block. So the indented, just like you have a function that's indented with its own code, the while loop is going to have its indented area with its own block or its own set of code. So that's what the statements are, and once those statements execute and it reaches the bottom, it's going to go back up to the top of the while, that while line, if you can imagine it, at the top of the block, and it's going to evaluate it again. So it's going to say, it's going to run that same condition back again, and it's going to say, am I still true? Like, if it's true, then, it's going to come back down, and then that's going to repeat so long that it's true. But, if you have, you set up your while loop correctly, and eventually it's going to come to something that says, hey, I'm false. Like, I don't want to run this loop anymore, right? I don't have an infinite loop. So then it'll jump around, so it won't run the block again, and it'll just run to the next statement in the same line of the while loop. So it'll jump past the block of code if it's false, and then go to the next statement and end the loop. If that makes sense. If anyone has any questions, drop them in chat.
And be careful with this because this is where, as Rob mentioned earlier, the possibility of infinite loops comes into play. So as you can see the flow diagram, it checks if the condition is false. We'll see later on, but like imagine the condition is true, or you type in while true. If you never make it false, it'll keep running forever,
Exactly.
right? Forever in a literal sense, like it'll run until,
So long as, yeah,
yeah,
until
as
you
the
kill the
compiler
program.
allows it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Right.
you be careful with that.
Right.
So now the next part will be we'll be diving into for loops in more depth. So how do for loops work in Python, as well as some examples with for loops. So how do for loops work in Python? So as mentioned, like for loops are commonly used when you like have a block of code which you want to repeat a fixed number of times, right? So it iterates over the members of a sequence in order. So it pretty much just repeats instructions inside the loop a number of times it's specified. Um, there is also uh, syntax which will be coming to which we'll be talking about the next two slides upcoming about common syntax for loops. I know it's harder to visualize this while we explain what it is, so we'll just move on to the next slide and then come back and explain it more in depth when we get to that slide.
So this is back again. I'll skip that. I don't think
Yeah,
this isn't different, is it? We didn't make it different. No, this is the same.
no, it's the same
Yeah.
one. Does anyone have any questions about it? If you want us to answer again, that's the point of it being there. No, chat's good. Go for it. All right. So there's two ways to use a for loop. So as I mentioned before, there's two different ways to use it in syntax. So there's for I in range, as you've seen before in the example, and you saw that there was for I in range 5. There was no start, stop, or step, right? When you just have one, it'll go through by incrementing 1 up to 5, 0 to 5, right? That's how it works. But um, the range function has more functionality than that. It's much easier, nicer to use. So I believe in 104 and 164 they will require you in future labs and assignments to use the start, stop, step method. I mean those parameters. So when you have for I in range, and then you have like where you want to start, where you want it to stop, right? So let's say you start at 1, you stop at 5, and then step would be how much you're incrementing it by. So if you do +4 or +5 all the way up to uh, start or stop, it'll go from like instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it'll go 1, 5 instantly if you have step by +4. You can also decrement by using it. So that's the syntax for that. It's very straightforward. If anyone has any questions, you can ask. But there's also another great functionality that for loops have. I don't know if you guys have discussed this or went through this yet, but it's for loops allows you to iterate through sets of items, right? So if you have like a array, for example, for I in array, it can pretty much go through every item in that array, right? So let's say you have an array and it'll go through like every index in that array. So let's say you have an item in a shopping cart. So for item in shopping cart, right? It'll pretty much just print out or go through every specific item that was in there and run whatever block of code you have in there. So that is also something really helpful which you'll be needing to use in the real world, as well as um, when you guys start learning more about arrays and lists, especially 2D lists.
So,
Um,
yeah, this is an
I'll just go for
example,
this.
Jake.
Yeah. Yeah. So is this an example? Or? Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is common for loop syntaxes, like I mentioned before. So as we mentioned in the previous slide, there's the for I in range start, stop, step, right? And then whatever block of code you have in there, there's the for I in range, and wherever you want it to stop at, where it'll increment at 1 down below. And then there's the for I in array, which will go through the array.
And am I right in saying that, it's been a while since I did the Python, but for I in array, will the I in this situation, if you have an array, it's actually gonna take on like the actual like if let's say we have an array of objects, right? I will actually represent one of the objects, won't it? It won't be
Yeah,
a number. So yeah, that's getting a little bit more
yeah,
complicated. If you use the I in array, um, depending on what you have your array as, so let's say you have an array of numbers, I will represent each actual number in that array starting from like the front, like the index 0 all the way to the last value in the array. So like if I were to print, for I in array, print I, and I had an array that was a bunch of strings, I would actually be equal to each string. So it would print the string. So if my array was like uh hello LCS review, and those were three separate strings in this array, I would take on the value of each one of those indexes of the array. So it would start and it would be like hello, so I would equal hello, and then if I printed it, it would come up in the console, it'll say hello, and then the next time it comes around, it'll go in and then it'll be like LCS, and then it goes around again, and then it just goes until it's done the array. So that's an important thing to note with using the in operator. And I believe it's the same way that range works as well, I believe.
similar.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions regarding any of this?
Yeah. That last bit might be
I know,
a
yeah.
little too much.
I know, like, just in general, like, when you're first learning it, it could be, like, a bit confusing. So if there's anything, like, no question is a dumb question. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask and help you out.
All right, well, they could just throw them in the chat. We'll answer them as we go.
Yeah.
All right, interactive example. So I'll actually swap here
Yep.
to replit. For loop examples. Let's do example 1. I don't know if this is going to be readable. I think I should probably make my screen a little bit bigger here. That's probably a lot better. Maybe a little too big. All right. So here, we're creating a for loop to calculate 4 factorial. So if you're not familiar with factorial, if you've ever seen the little exclamation point next to a number, what it means is that it's each number. I don't know why there's a tag there. Okay, it's like each number. You're multiplying the number again by itself minus 1. So that's how you end up with, so if you have 4, it multiplies with 4 minus 1, which is 3, and then it goes 3 minus 1, which is 2, and then it multiplies each step along the way. So that's kind of like this is our definition of factorial, if you don't know what it is. So if our target is 5, we're setting target to 5, factorial to 1, and then here's our loop. So we have I in range 1 to target. So we're going to be starting at 1, and we're going to be going up until 5. So we're going to define our factorial here. So we're starting at 1, and we're going to do times equals is what's known as a shorthand operator for just saying factorial times, so it's a tongue twister. Factorial times factorial equals factorial times I. Here, let me type this out. I'm gonna say fact equals fact times I. So this is a shorthand operator is what it's called for pretty much this statement here. It just removes the redundancy of having to type factorial twice.
It's just a way to, like,
Shorten your code.
save time.
Yeah,
Yeah, and save time. You'll notice you could, instead of the multiplication asterisk, you'll also have plus, minus,
mhm.
divide. So they're all shorthand. Just know it means fact equals fact. times whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Or if this was a plus.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can look into those on your own time. They do get a little bit tricky, especially with the addition and subtraction, with the order that you put the equals and the operator in, though, I believe. So anyways, we have if I is less than 4, print I, and then this is where we're defining the end, what do you call it? So instead of like a new line, we're gonna be having a star at the end of our print statement. That's all that means. I think we covered that in like our first session.
Yeah.
Else we're just gonna print I. So we're gonna notice how the range goes up to 5 but does not include 5, right? So that kind of answers the question that I had from earlier. The way range works is that our stop is an exclusive stop. So meaning it's go up until I is less than the target, not less than or equal to. So it won't actually count up to 5 itself. If I'm getting that correct, Jag, you can correct
0,
me if I'm...
1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 right there. Because we count from starting from 0, not. But yeah, what you're saying is correct, yeah.
Are you sure we're counting from 0? It's 1 here.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't see the start there. My bad.
Yeah,
I just meant in
we're
general.
starting at
Yeah.
1. Yeah. So in sequence, the numbers, yeah, that I will be equal to in each iteration are 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, that's because our target, which is equal to 5, even though we're going from 1 to 5, we're excluding 5. It's exclusive of 5. So that explains that. So, and then over here, we print our result. And if I give this a run, it'll print exactly what we expected it. So it's actually printing this in a line, but this is being generated from this for loop. So if that makes any sense, do we have any questions in chat? Maybe I skipped over some important things.
I don't
So we
see any
have,
question.
I can break it down a little more, right? We start at 1, so I is 1 at the first iteration, the first time the code meets this line. I is set to 1 because this is our starting value. And then we have factorial, which we set to 1 over here, being times by itself. So factorial, factorial equals factorial times I. So this is just 1 times 1 because, again, we're starting at 1, um, and then we're timesing it by 1, which is 1. And then we come down here and we evaluate if it's less than 4, then we're going to have a multiplication symbol after it, meaning, we have more left to do. That's all this is saying. And then it just repeats this until I is equal to the target, essentially, because we don't want to print it if it's equal to the target, because you remember it's exclusive. So I becomes 5 eventually, and then this evaluates to essentially false, right? And then it skips it doesn't run it again, and then it comes down here and it prints this. I don't know if I'm being too clear or not.
I
Anyway,
think you're clear enough. I think if
yeah,
you go any further, you might just end up overcomplicating it.
yeah.
Okay, someone asked a question. So your factorial variable is your increment in the code. So
So
if you
no,
don't have an increment, it'll just increment by 1 every time.
yeah. So yeah, exactly what Jag said. So our increment right now is like not stated in our range function. So if you remember, there was a start. So you can have range with a maximum of 3 parameters. The first is start, the middle is step, and the last is stop. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a start, stop, and then
Okay, sorry.
increment like step. Yeah.
Right. So
But
yeah. So
I
our
was just gonna
increment,
say,
yeah.
just to add on, just to make it like much easier and simple, if you don't, by default, your start and your step are gonna be Like your step's gonna be 1, and I believe your start's gonna be 0. So they have default values if you don't
Right.
state them. But if you end up stating them, it just overwrites that
It
value, of
overrides.
course, right?
Right.
So then clearly we have start and stop, but we don't have a step here, so it'll just take the default step, which is 1, and go with that.
Right. So I could add 2 here, and
Yeah.
this, like what Jay's saying, this will be our new step. So it won't step by 1 each time now. This will be kind of wacky, and we'll be completely wrong, but we can run it to see what happens. So
Yeah.
1, 3, 4
Yeah. So
is equal to 3. Yeah, so we completely broke our code, obviously, but we can see that instead of going 1, 2, we're going 1 to 3, and then
and then it stops.
it stops because 3, right? It's gonna plus 2 to 3, so it's gonna go to 5, and we know that because target's 5, we're not gonna run this when I is equal to the target. It's only less than because it's exclusive of the target.
Yeah.
So an assignment
So
target.
in
Yeah.
your assignment, you can just leave it as is, and it should be fine. It's just it depends on whoever's marking it, because they do have marking schemes. If in the marking scheme it states that you need to have an increment, then you're you might lose marks. So I say just for the sake of it, just have the increment on there. But for your own understanding, just know that by default the increment will be 1.
hmm So do I go through all the examples, or do we have?
Yeah, we do have later, so we can just yeah, you can just go to the next slide, which is diving into while loops. Okay. Yeah, no problem, Amanda. So now we'll be diving into while loops, which these are really fun. I won't lie, I love while loops. So how do while loops work in Python is as well as their example.
You have to
Pretty
make sure
standard.
you use them correctly though, because
Yeah,
you can make a while loop do the job of a for loop. But if you do that, then David Brown's gonna be really angry.
yeah. And you gotta watch out for infinite loops, as we mentioned. So while loops are best used when you have a block of code that you want to repeat, but you don't know the exact number, right? Like, so you want to just keep doing whatever the block of code is until it meets a certain condition, right? Um, so you can't use it a specific number of times. Like, you can't say, hey, I'm specifying I want you to do this for like 10, 20 times, right? You can be like, while true, and then just keep going until it's false, because you don't know when it'll become false. Um, and then that works, but they pretty much work on the premise that the condition it's given is true. So once the condition becomes false, then the loop will stop, right? But you have to watch out for infinite loops, as we mentioned, but we'll talk about that later on. So,
Yeah, so while loops are used to execute a block of statements repeatedly until a given condition is no longer satisfied. So as Jake just said, yeah, this is kind of just reiterating what Jag is saying using the diagram that we went through earlier. So again, it's possible to run infinite loops. You really, really have to watch out for this, um, because depending on what you're doing, um, it can be pretty annoying, and you'll get pretty frustrated. And that's when print statements come into play, actually.
yeah.
Using print in your while loops make it so much easier to identify your infinite loops because you'll just see your console just fill up with the same thing, or like, it'll just explode your console pretty much, so you'll know. But if you ever notice that your program is running for more than like 3 seconds in, at least in CP104, you probably have an infinite while loop because
Yeah.
it should finish in like 1 to 2 seconds, not even
So
2 seconds.
just to add on to that, just a quick example I will just verbally mention is like,
Yeah.
so imagine you have some statement, right? So you enter loop and check the condition. Let's say there's something called count, which is equal to like 0, right? And you want the loop to keep running until count is greater than 9, right? So while count is less than 9, or while 9 is greater than count, whatever way you want to word it, print out whatever count is and then increment count by 1, like count equals count plus 1 within the code. So it'll pretty much just go, if the condition is true, do the statement, move on, blah 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 blah. Keep going. I don't know why this says increment, decrement, slash decrement the next number, next item. That shouldn't be there. That was for the for loops.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
it'll pretty much just be enter loop, go to statement, enter loop again. Like check condition. So check condition, keep going, keep going, keep going. And once count is greater than 9, it'll be like, okay, like the condition is false now, so we'll end the loop.
Yep.
So this is a what we meant, like while loops could be used in place of for loops, but for 104 and 164, I believe it's not recommended unless you
Yeah,
have
no.
to.
No,
Yeah,
it's never recommended. So
yeah,
like this right here, if you notice that this flow was the exact same as Jag said with the for loops, but the thing is, you can exactly recreate this in a while loop if you wanted to, because you could introduce yourself a variable that increments, and then you could make your while condition, you know, x is less than 5, and then it'll work exactly the same as a while loop would. It'll run 5 times. But you shouldn't be using a while loop, you should be using a for loop. So it's just it's functionally exactly the same. It's not like more or less efficient to the computer. The computer doesn't care. Um, it's more about readability of your code, and it's like best practice. So
yeah. It's
yeah,
programming practice.
it's best practice. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And then so here is
Good one.
again, this is the for loop one
This
because
is
of
just a
this.
duplicate. You can move
Yeah.
on. Yeah, but
Mhm.
all right.
So
So
yeah, so two ways to use a while loop. The first one is while a Boolean expression is true, and the other one is while a mathematical and or Boolean comparisons. So I think that's just, you could combine both if you need to. Basically, um, a while will take what's like the same thing as like an if statement. It'll be some sort of condition, and you can pass it a single variable if it's a Boolean, I believe. I'm not sure what happens if you actually pass it integer. Do you know, Jake?
like, what do you mean? Like
Like you
pass it
pass
in
a while
integer?
loop in like an integer. Like imagine if is running was like equal to 5. Do you know what would happen? Well, we
I
should.
don't think it'll run.
Yeah, I think it'll crash. I'm just curious. I don't know. Python likes to make weird things work, so um anyways, yeah, so let's say here we have is running equals true, right? And then we have while is running. Well, is running is what's called a Boolean type variable, so it's either true or false. And we know that the while loop takes a condition that needs to evaluate to what? It needs to evaluate to true or false. So just passing it true is going to have it run. But the issue with this is that um, if you had nothing to change is running from true to false, this will be an infinite loop. So it'll just, so long as is running is true, this is running around in circles here. So, yeah, exactly. So this is an infinite loop, FYI, which equals bad news for you. Um, that was funny. Whoever did it. That was probably Nosher who wrote that. And yeah, so it really boils down to your while and then the condition and then some statement.
It doesn't even have to be a condition. It can be like an expression. I believe you can also just like while, like there you could put a list in or something. But like, don't worry, you're not going to be using that right now. So
Oh
like
yeah,
it's going to be a condition like true or false essentially,
yeah.
right? That's what it checks. Yeah.
Someone in chat said it treats it like true if int is greater than 0.
All right.
Interesting.
Thank you very
Yeah, I
much.
didn't know
I
that.
never knew that. Yeah.
So yeah, and then on the right side here, we have x and y to set to 2 and 5 respectively. And we're, just doing, just like you had in like an if statement, a couple weeks ago or whatever. We're doing a little bit of a statement, a little evaluation here. Is x less than y? So, 2 is less than 5. That's true. And we're going to print x is greater than y.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. But yeah, because x is less than y. But okay.
It's a trick. But
It's a
like
trick. But anyways,
it's similar to if statement. I was just gonna add on. It's similar to a if statement, but instead of running it just once, you see that it runs multiple times.
yeah. And then here, this is very important. We have x being updated, the value of x, so that it eventually makes this evaluate to false. It eventually becomes equal to y, 5, and then this will no longer run. But, you know, the keen of you will, realize that this is really just a for loop because we're just running. We know the exact amount of times we need to run it for, right? We're running it from 2 to 5 and printing this statement, but oh, whoops. But we're running it into a while loop, which again works, but is bad practice. So yeah, try to avoid that. That's just a good example for you of how you can turn a while loop into a for loop sort of thing.
So just move on to the next slide, or
Yep.
yeah. So we'll just go to the next slide, and we'll just show you just a brief example before we go to the Replit interactive example. So this will just show, whoa, there's like 3-in-1 while loops. So as you guys probably already know, you can use or and operators now, and you'll see like it'll be a while A or B. So that is like this entire expression is a condition, but each separate condition on the left or right, it'll also be evaluated because it's an and. So it'll check, is whatever you're giving it A or B, is it a dog or a cat? If it's either, it'll be true. And then if counter is less than or equal to 5, then that'll also be true. Then it'll move into the chunk of code. If either side was false, it would not execute the chunk of code, and the while loop will not be executed whatsoever. It'll just be skipped over because the condition is false.
Right.
Make sense so far? Yeah. So then it'll just execute the code inside of it, which, the cat or dog is in the house. If the counter equal to 5, then it's 5 p.m. So the pets are back in the house, and then counter just goes up. Once again, this is fine for a while loop. I was gonna say like it could have been used in a for loop, but you don't
No.
know
Yeah.
if a dog or a cat will
Yeah.
be there,
This is a
right?
good
And you don't
example.
know about the counter. So
Mhm.
this is an example of like where you first look at it and be like, oh, this could be in a for loop. Then you're like, oh, no, it can't actually, right?
Yeah.
What does while A or B do? So while A or B is okay, so the entire thing is a condition. So from after the while up to the colon, the entire thing is one condition that has to be true for the code to run. So because we see the and in the middle, that means both the condition on the left and right side have to be true for the entire expression to be true. So to get to your question, what does while A or B do? So while doesn't
A.
ignore the while for now. We'll look at A or B. So as you can see at the top, A or B is dog and cat, right? So when you say while A or B, you pretty much say like while uh there's not like code before this, but like while like let's say the pet was equal to a dog or a cat, right? Then continue. That's pretty much it.
Oops, I clicked back. Whoops. I think this code is evaluating to in Python, it's like
It's
like not null, right? Or none. if these were none, if both of these were none, I think this would evaluate to false, and then this
Yeah.
would not run. So it's saying like while A or B like exists. Think about it like that. So if the variable A was set to none and the variable B was set to none and both of these were none, so like none or null, it's this side of the and would be false. And because we're running an and here, we know that. Oh, did my computer just freeze? Hello?
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
My PC is just completely frozen. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello? Jag?
Um, what's going
Hello?
on?
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yeah,
Am I,
hello?
oh, am I
That
back?
was really weird. There was
Yeah.
a weird lag spike on my side as well for some reason.
Okay. Well, my computer just froze. It's fine. I'm back. Anyways, what I was saying was on the we have an and statement, meaning, the left side in brackets here is like bed mass, needs to be true, and the right side needs to be true for this to run, for the while to evaluate to true and run. So if both of these, A and B, were none, then this would be false, and our and statement would be false as well. This whole statement would be false, and it would just skip it. So does that answer your question? Is what I'm gonna say next.
I
I'll move on.
think we're good to go.
It's
Yeah.
fine. I'll do another
Uh,
example
uh,
here.
pretty much way to explain is true, and then yeah.
I'll do an example. So here's another example of using a while loop like it's a for loop. So here we're printing low and we're printing high. So we can see that high never changes and low gets incremented by 1. So again, this is our shorthand operator, meaning that, we're adding 1 to low and then making it equal itself. So we start at 1, but I have the plus sign before the equal sign here. Actually, no, it's gonna run plus, so it's gonna run 2. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's gonna go. We start at 1 here. We start at 5, and then we're gonna go till, pretty much we're gonna go till low equals high because we have a less than here. We're gonna go till it's equal or higher to, essentially. So we increment it. We increment every time the while loop goes through, and then eventually, when it gets to 5, it doesn't run it again because we're no longer less than high, which is 5. And to demonstrate, like you were saying, the A or B before, if I change both of these to none and I print this as inside the loop, and then I have another print outside the loop, and we're gonna say done,
Yep.
and I'm gonna change this to or. So this is the same thing. To visualize it, no, I'll change it to A or B. I don't know why it keeps giving me the IntelliSense. I don't need that.
Yeah.
And then I give this a
Oh,
run.
just right.
Notice how it doesn't print the loop. And that's because this
If
is just a thing with Python and the way, statements work in Python. This will be the same thing for like an if statement. It's just like these little nuances with Python that you can do to make statements either true or false. There's like a bunch of little things you can do. This is one of them. Jag, if you had anything to add, so I
no,
cut you
I was
off.
just gonna say like Python's very chill about everything. Like Python's
Yeah.
like some of the stuff you do here in Python in other languages they wouldn't allow it. Is all I had to say. But done. Type in a string just to show them that one, if one was had some sort of string in it.
If one had a string in
So
it, or a,
no,
what do
well
we?
a well yeah, just well a equals like I don't know, dog or none. I think yeah, that works too, honestly. And then
What?
wall A or B.
See, look, this doesn't
Done.
run now, right? Because actually, here,
Yeah,
let's do
yeah.
or. This will, this will run now, and we got an infinite loop because I have
Yes.
nothing in here that that
Stops
stops
it
it.
from.
So we could go a equals none in here. So this will run
Yeah.
once essentially.
You might
Apparently I need to
wanna
clear the
clear.
console. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Done.
So we have A or B. So this is saying like when you just have a statement like this, um, and you're passing a variable on either side, it's just checking whether it's none or it's not none. If it's none, it equals to false. If it's not none, then it equals to true, is kind of what it boils down to when you just have a single variable on either side of a comparison.
Or if there's a full expression like a condition or and then a condition, which was what I was trying to explain last thing. So let's say
Yeah,
you have like if one is greater than five and then or five is greater than one on the other side, it'll check like both conditions separately and then it'll be like, okay, this is false, this is true. And then it'll look at the operator in the middle, it'll be like it's an or, so as long as there's one true, it's true. If it was an and, it'd be false.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't want to overcomplicate it for you guys, so just move on because you'll pretty much learn these basics in the start of every CP class over and over again. So if anyone has any other questions about anything we mentioned, let us know.
yeah. So here's actually a good example, another one of using
Yeah,
the functionality of a while loop because we have a little statement here that needs to evaluate to true for it to run. So we have true is running starts as true and we have x starting as 0. So we come into the loop with is running being true and our x being 0, which makes it less than 10, meaning that's true. So this whole thing is true. So it'll enter into our block and it'll say if it's equal to 8, set this to false. Well, it's 0, right? So it's not x is not 8. So we're going to skip this. This is getting skipped and we're just going to print x and then we're going to increment our x by 1. But you see if this was a normal for loop, this would go all the way up to 10. So this would print all 0, 1, 2, 3, yada yada up to 10. But since we have this little statement inside our while loop that changes is running to false when x is equal to 8, it cuts it short. So we say we want to stop running when x is 8, and we can see that it stops when x is 8, and it doesn't actually get all the way up to 10. So that's kind of some usefulness there of a while loop.
that example perfectly sums up everything we wanted to say.
Yeah,
Any questions, anyone? Or just move on to the next slide. We're at it.
yeah, we're
So
going over time here a little bit.
yeah, this is a little bit of like a summary all over again because we went on a little bit of a tangent, but it's like how to use a while loop. So while condition and then the chunk, the code chunk in down below, it's like always runs while the condition is true. So if the condition, like while false or whatever, it will not run. It will only run while it's the condition's true. And it's useful when you don't know how long the loop will run for, or if something abstract or crazy like while A or B, something like that, where you can't use in a for loop,
Yeah,
right? Uh,
and then infinite loops
yeah.
again. I remember to caution for those. An infinite loop again is when it runs forever. We kind of covered it a little bit of what they are and how to avoid them. So it's just the big one here is just while true, do something. That sums it up. So if this will always be true because we just set it to true. But let's say you had a variable that you have set to true, you have like a equals true, and you never change what a is equal to. So it essentially means the same thing. That's what you have to keep an eye out for. Always make sure that, your variables in your while statement are being used somewhere and being updated, or else you could run into some problems. And again, your print statements are the best for
Yeah.
keeping track of what your variables are looking like.
Yeah, just to add on to that, honestly, like as Robert mentioned, yeah, print statements. Use the print statements. They're really helpful. You guys might be like, why are we using print statements? Like the more you go on, the more you'll realize. Like imagine you have like 1,000 different lines of code doing like doing many different things, right? If you have a print statement, it just helps you realize like what's happening there as a testing procedure. So it's really helpful.
It's a good way of
It'll
testing your
help
code.
you figure, yeah, and it just helps you like figure out what's going on, where the general area of the problem is much quicker.
Yeah. And I see there's a little bonus point here saying there's cases where infinite loop is helpful. Example, running a server. We don't need to get into that, but let's say you want your server to always be on and you need to have it always running like a certain code to check something, let's say. I'm keeping this very basic. I can see your face, Jag. Yeah. You
I was
going,
like, why are we
I
explaining
don't know,
this?
we're not.
Yeah,
Well, I'm just touching on it, just why they
yeah,
could be useful. Anyways, it'll just keep the program running is the usefulness of like what would be an infinite loop. They're not useful for CP104, so don't worry about it.
yeah. Does anyone have any further questions?
Yeah.
And as we mentioned
So yeah.
before, if you have any other questions that weren't touched upon here, and you have any more LCS, you can put the questions in there in the 104 channel, or you can send one of us a message on Discord. Yeah,
Um,
so if you can just fill out this survey for the end, it'll just help us
just drop me
get
in
some
chat.
feedback. All right, awesome.
So yeah, please fill out that survey. It's for session feedback, anything we need to improve on, talk more about, talk less about, make more
If you
jokes.
prefer more diagrams, if you prefer more interactive examples, stuff like that, it just helps us create these sessions and the slides and how everything will flow.
So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And we could take some questions. Still, still open to
Yeah,
questions here
we'll be here for like another
in the
5-10 minutes. If there's no questions, yeah, we'll head out.
So yeah, thanks everyone.
Um, yeah, there's another slide, Rob, by the way. Yeah, yeah, no problem. Yeah,
All
nice
right,
seeing you,
take care.
Frosty. Thanks for
Take care,
coming. Take
Frosty.
care.
Yep. Boom boom.
Yeah, and then these are just mental health resources. You can use a Safe Hawk app to connect with like different helplines and other mental
Yeah.
health resources.
I don't
There's a
think we need to
Student
go through
Wellness
this slide.
Center and then Delton Counseling Center.
Yeah. All right. Well, take care everyone. Looks like that's it.